All right. Sorry I've been a little bit late on my video. I know it's been like 2 weeks worth instead of the 1 week, but I know we got a little bit behind with school. Well, not really behind, we just had a lot of work to do. So, alright, here it goes. So yours was due by today, but we'll go ahead and do mine from a couple weeks ago. So your question is what makes genes dominant? Or like one gene's dominant, one gene's recessive? Like how does that happen? Why does that happen? So it's actually way more complicated than that, but there was a few sites I was able to go to find a couple of simplistic answers, but it's really simplistic, like there's way more detail than this, but here's what I found of pretty much some basic answers, I guess you could say. A little way oversimplified, but alright, here we go. So, as you know, like, as far as genes go, you have a copy from each parent. So you have two copies, and they're not exact copies, but you're going to get one from each parent. And what makes them dominant or not actually depends on the gene itself. Because what the genes are supposed to do is they're like instructions to help make these proteins in your body. So if one ends up making a protein that's broken, and then the other one becomes dominant. But you can have the genes to where both proteins are broken, so they both end up being recessive, or they both end up being dominant, or one's dominant, one's not. And I'll get into that in a little bit because there's some differences that can happen, of course, depending on the gene. That's why I said it depends on the gene as far as how the dominance actually affects everything. So how they become dominant or not is just if it produces a broken gene, recessive. If it ends up producing the protein that it's supposed to, then it's dominant. So one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting that I looked into is if both the proteins are broken. Of course, it can also produce things too. Like that's actually how our red hair is produced, because there's a gene that stops the red pigment from being created, or like gets rid of it. And if both of those genes that you get from your parents that are supposed to stop that pigment from being produced are broken, then you end up with red hair. I thought that was pretty cool. There's another case to where both copies of the gene need to be dominant in order for it to work. Like for the proteins that are used to help filter your kidneys. If both of those don't work, they're both not dominant, then you end up with kidney disease, even if only one of them works. Because just one of them working doesn't produce enough of the protein to properly filter out the blood. But sometimes one is enough. One can, depending on what the job it's supposed to do, one is enough to have one dominant gene to do the whole job of whatever's necessary, or whatever it produces. Because there's multiple scenarios, interactions, it depends on what kind of gene you're referring to as the different outcomes and stuff like that. Like when it comes to eye color, there's several different genes that help determine, not just one. So like one dominant gene may not determine the eye color, it's based on multiple different sets of genes. So I thought that was pretty cool, because I always thought it was just one gene for eye color, and whichever one was dominant would be it, but no, it's way more complicated than that. But yeah, if it's dominant or recessive, that's how it's determined, is if the gene that you get actually produces what it's supposed to, then it becomes dominant. If it can't produce the protein that it's supposed to, then it's recessive. So, and that's kind of like a luck of the draw thing. Because just because your parents both had dominant genes, that ended up being passed to you, when they get to you, they may not end up being dominant. Both of them could be broken. So yeah, it's just really complicated. There's way more factors than just is it broken or not. But to answer your question, how does one gene become dominant, one become recessive? There it is. But if you want to look more into that, I found some really good sites that I'll put below. Well, 2 articles. It was really hard actually to find, other than going to Google, because I was trying to look through all the different academic sites, and they were going into way more detail, and now I understand why, because it's not that simple of an answer, depending on what you're looking for. Okay, so here's going to be my question. We developed it because we were watching a lot of detective shows lately, as you know. So one of the things that we noticed is that during the show, whenever they're referring to white people, they usually refer to them as Caucasians. But when they're referring to black people, they just refer to them as black. So I know we kind of went a little bit over that in our diversity class, but see if you can find anything, any kind of recent articles or research that says why that still is the way it is, or why that is that way in the first place. Any one of those will do. That'll be fine. Give you a pretty easy one this time. Alright. I'm just going to let this video drag on for a little longer so that we can try to figure out the issues that I'm having on my end as far as why it's cutting the video out. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Alright, well hopefully my question at least is not cut off. It doesn't really matter if the rest of the stuff